Hi, welcome to week 2 of theories and practice of group work. This week, what we start to look at is the group dynamics, and continue to unpack what groups actually are. What is this thing we call groups, and particularly why do we join them? Why are we part of groups? What purpose does that fill for us? And also, what does it fill for other people? And particularly thinking about the reading from Forsyth, which I've put up online, goes into a lot of detail about how we even how people measure those particular things within groups as well. But to start with, I asked you to have a look at from last week at the end of the lesson at particularly at the Johari window. Um, and that's an interesting place to start, because I think whenever we talk about groups and our understanding of groups, it's important to understand from our own perspective as to what groups do for us, and how I guess why we become part of groups in our society. Um, and Johari Windows is just interesting in the sense that it picks up on the idea that we obviously show some parts of ourselves to others. We hide some parts of ourselves to others, but then it also picks up that there's some parts of ourselves that we don't even know about, but others do. And then there's other parts of ourselves that we don't know about and no one else knows about either. And so I guess a group, being part of a group dynamic, gives potential to uncover parts of ourselves that we wouldn't understand without that. So if we're in pure isolation, we would never find out those things about ourselves. Um, it also gives us the motivation to share ourselves, and potential to share even hidden parts of ourselves with others. Because again, in isolation, where's the motivation to actually do those things, to share parts of ourselves? If you're stuck on a desert island, the classic Robinson Crusoe type story, what motivation do you have to actually keep living, keep sharing yourself, keep growing, those kind of things? And often in those types of stories, we even create a sense of connection, a sense of connecting with someone, with some other thing, not even another human being, but something that we've made up. I think if anyone's watched the I Am Legend movie with Will Smith, about the zombie movie, he creates dummies that he goes into shops so he can actually talk to somebody and have that sense of being able to be part of connecting with another group of people, even though they weren't even real and they can't respond. So there's some basic human need, but I'll go into that a bit more later when we start talking about the group dynamics that Forsyth picks up on. So yes, that Johari window gives us an idea, a context around ourselves. But then I guess the question is raised, why do we join these groups? What is the purpose and the type of groups? And those two things are very connected. So types of groups, we'll talk more about that because it'll help you with your assignments. But we've sort of discovered, even from the readings last week, that there are many different types. We have task groups, we have social groups, we have emotional support groups, we have psychoeducational groups. There's different purposes, but I guess the type is about the purpose. What do we need from these groups as people? That kind of governs why we join the groups that we join. One of the questions we'll ask in the workshop is how many groups you're actually part of. It's a really interesting thing to start thinking about. That to actually start to recognise that we are actually generally in a whole range of groups, and they all serve quite different purposes. And then we also take roles in those groups, and we might take different roles in different groups depending on, again, on the purpose of those groups that they actually serve for us. I like in Forsyth's reading, there's a table 2.2, some examples of group roles from sociometry, sorry. And some of the ideas of these roles, some of the definitions of these roles are, sometimes we have clique members, so those who are part of a subcluster within a group, and we've all, seen cliques in different things and or experienced either being in a clique or often being outside of the clique within a group. There's couples, pairs within groups, so two people who like one another and so have quite reciprocal bonds. They a lot of interdependence between each other, so form quite a strong bond as a pair. Gatekeepers, really interesting role that some people take up, those located between one part of the group and another. And so, like a gatekeeper in a village, they can control the flow of information or the flow of who gets to know what. I'll talk more about that in the workshop about that role of gatekeeper, but I imagine that you could think of that person in some of the groups that you've been involved in, particularly community type groups. There's often that character who's a gatekeeper. There's the isolates, loners who are infrequently chosen by any members. People who are quite isolated within a group scenario. The classic never getting picked for the sporting team, those kind of things. Then there's the rejecteds, the unpopulars, those who are disliked by many members. Again, you can sort of see that within group situations, particularly thinking back through school is a very obvious place, but happens in other community settings quite frequently as well. Then there's the sociables, the positives, those who select many others as their friends. The kind of, not just the popular, because that's the next one, the stars who are popular, those most chosen, well-liked, very popular members, high choice status. But the sociables are those ones who actually select a lot of other people. They connect with a lot of people and so have a broad friendship group within groups. And then there's the unsociables, those who select few others as their friends, who are quite selective, in terms of who they might connect with within that group, and choose on those, or choose in a very selective way. And so you just sort of see when you start outlining those group roles that often, depending on what the group is and what the purpose of those groups are, for us, we might actually be one of those roles, or we might take a couple of those roles. I find interesting in my own connection and community that I'm often very quick to pick up who is a gatekeeper within those communities, because I've in my experience, I've seen the blocking and some of the negative aspects of gatekeepers. But as I've stayed in community situations and gained influence through longevity, I suppose, and also interaction and skill and such things, part of what I started to understand is that I become the gatekeeper. And so do I use my responsibility as a gatekeeper well, or do I use it negatively? So it's interesting, again, within your role as group, sometimes those things can change too, as you spend time and commit energy into those group settings. You might move from being one of those things to something quite different. And I guess the other part of groups is that, as this suggests too, is that groups are dynamic. So we talk about group dynamics as a kind of a thing, but think about the word dynamic, moving, always changing and never static. And so groups have this situation where there's a dynamic, they are dynamic. And so within that, then there is the dynamics, the mechanisms that kind of move and change and make those groups, so they aren't a static thing. And I was again interested in some of Forsyth's writing about, obviously talking about how you even measure these things in a scientific type way, both qualitative, quantitative. It's got quite a bit of information in there. But he talked about the theoretical perspectives that people utilise to try and understand groups. And one of those perspectives is motivational and emotional perspective. where there's a sense of, I guess, that you have motivations within a group, that you want it to you have some reason or some purpose for being part of that group and giving energy. And then as part of that motivation, you also have emotional needs that are met as well, and emotional reactions to those motivations. And he even mentions that it's a bit of Maslow's hierarchy of needs in that situation, that we can actually understand groups by that sense of what it actually gives to us in terms of some very basic need, which is of human connection, human interaction, having purpose, having meaning, those kind of things. He also says, talks about the behavioural. So a lot of Skinner's work, if those people who've done a bit of counselling and things like that too, might know a bit about Skinner. But those things is about the law of effect, essentially, in behavioural, in that, the positive interactions or the positive rewards that we get for being part of a group in this situation will keep us involved in it, as opposed to the negative consequences will tend to turn us away from it. So in the social exchange of groups, groups that work well will tend to have a great reward, both personal, in terms of what we wanted to achieve or what you want to achieve, interactionally, in terms of what you receive from it, and the connections that you make. Those positives will far outweigh the negatives in terms of, and not even just negative things, but the investment, the hard work, how much time I have to put into it, how I feel after it, what happens when we fail, all those kind of things. So that's a behavioural understanding or perspective. There's also systems theory, and this is particularly around the dynamic, that the groups are not just not a static thing, but they continually adjust and work through processes, and it's that kind of adjustment that continually happens, and the interactional nature of that these things are open, and that causes the dynamic. That actually they are dynamic and growing and changing, and there's going to be an equilibrium reached within some of those things. That's what you're kind of looking for, but there's a constant adjustment happening to reach that equilibrium as things change within the group scenario. Then there's also a cognitive understanding, that we gather information cognitively using our brains. We make sense of it, and we act on that sense that we make of it. And just when you join any group, straight away you make a judgment, don't you, on what the group is and what you think about it. So you'll gather information about what's going on there. You'll make sense of that for yourself, and then your actions will govern, I guess, or come out of rather, those kind of things that you've made sense of. So there's a cognitive understanding. And finally, there's a biological, that actually, physiologically, the way our genetics, whether we're males or females, potentially, how we're feeling, whether our heart's racing or we're feeling calm, whether we're suffering from any sort of illness or not. There's physiological, the whole neuro pathways, our understandings of things through our own neuro pathways that we've developed over time. All those things have an effect on groups, just physiological things and biological things. And so what I like about that is that it gives a whole range of perspectives, and to be honest, as he sort of says in the readings, those perspectives aren't exclusive of each other. And as you sort of think about those things, you can actually see that that they do interact together. So generally, when you're taking a theoretical perspective to try and understand groups and group dynamics, generally you'll sort of use a number of those things interacting together to see it from different angles. And so that's kind of what we're going to be talking about this week. Is that idea of understanding of the perspectives that help us to understand what groups are, and then particularly looking at how we interact and how we understand those dynamics that happen, those things that kind of interact, within groups, so that we can, I guess, try and influence ways that this is from, again, now moving into the sort of facilitation sort of aspect, is that we can start to facilitate things that are positive and positive outcomes from those groups, as opposed to negative dynamics that can pull groups to pieces. So look forward to seeing you. Excuse me. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow afternoon, and going through more of this in the workshop or those guys in Perth with Duncan. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you tomorrow.